My name is Renee Castillo, and I am 36 years old. 3 weeks ago, I sat in the second row of an annual shareholders meeting for Helder Construction Group, a company my sister-in-law has told people I answer phones for, and I watched her face when the corporate attorney read aloud the name of the majority stockholder. She went white. Not angry white. Not embarrassed white. The kind of white that happens when the floor you've been standing on turns out to be a trap door, and the name the attorney read was mine. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If you've ever been the quiet one in a loud family, the one who shows up, does the work, and never gets the credit, stay with me. Subscribe to Karma's Keeper, because this story is about what happens when the person they dismissed as just the nanny turns out to own 51% of everything. Let me take you back 9 years, to the day I married into the Helder family. I'm a cost estimator by trade. Before I ever set foot inside Helder Construction, I spent 4 years at a commercial firm in Tucson reading blueprints and calculating what things actually cost. Not what people wished they cost, not what the sales team promised they cost, but the real number. The load-bearing number. The one that decides whether a project stands or collapses. My degree is in construction management from Arizona State. My certification is in project cost estimation. I say this not to impress you, but because it matters. Because for the next 8 years, my sister-in-law Jolene would introduce me to subcontractors, clients, and city inspectors as basically our office help. And not once, not one single time, did she bother to ask what I actually did before I married her brother. I met David Helder at a roofing expo in Phoenix. He was there representing his father's company. I was there pricing out a membrane system for a hospital renovation. He asked me a technical question about thermal cycling on modified bitumen, and when I answered it correctly, with numbers, he looked at me like I'd just spoken a language he didn't know women could speak. We talked for 2 hours at that expo. He called me the next morning. We were married 14 months later. David was gentle, steady, good with his hands. He could frame a wall faster than anyone on his crew, and never once raised his voice on a job site. He smelled like sawdust and coffee, and he always opened the truck door for me, even when we were running late. But David didn't want to run the company. He told me that on our 3rd date. He said, "I love building things. I hate managing the people who build things." And that honesty, that willingness to say exactly what he was and wasn't, without pretending, is one of the reasons I married him. He knew his limits. He respected them. That's rarer than people think, especially in families where the last name is also the company name. David's father was Gerald Helder. Gerald started Helder Construction in 1987 with a pickup truck, a circular saw, and a $6,000 loan from his brother-in-law. By the time I joined the family, the company was doing $11 million a year in residential and light commercial work across Maricopa County. Gerald ran it like he built it. Hands-on, early mornings, no shortcuts. He was at the office by 6:15 every single day, including most Saturdays. He kept a torpedo level on his desk, not as decoration. He used it. He'd set it on stacks of invoices, on contract binders, on people's proposals. If someone handed him something he didn't trust, he'd reach for that level like it was a lie detector. If it's not level, he used to say, it's not right. And if it's not right, it's not mine. I heard him say that maybe 300 times over the years, to subcontractors who padded invoices, to salesmen who inflated specs, to his own daughter when she submitted a business development expense report that included a $420 spa day listed as client entertainment. He set the level right on top of that receipt, looked at Jolene, and said it. If it's not level, it's not right. She rolled her eyes and walked out. She always walked out. Gerald had 2 children. David, who was kind and competent, but had no ambition to run the company, and Jolene, who had plenty of ambition, but hadn't logged a full week at the office since 2014. Jolene's title was Vice President of Business Development. In practice, what she developed was a talent for taking clients to lunch, handing out business cards at country club mixers, and calling Gerald on Friday afternoons to ask if the quarterly numbers were looking good. She never opened a bid package. She never walked a job site in anything other than clean boots she kept in the trunk of her car, specifically for photo opportunities. She never sat through a 2-hour scope review with a general contractor, arguing about change orders at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night. She just showed up for the shiny parts and let everyone else handle the rest. I started showing up because Gerald asked me to. It began casually. David and I would have Sunday dinner at Gerald's house, and Gerald would ask me questions about the business. Not polite questions, not "how's work, Renee," small talk. Real questions, pointed questions. He'd pull out a project estimate that didn't feel right to him and slide it across the table between the dinner plates and the sweet tea. The first time I found a $42,000 math error in a subcontractor's bid, a transposition error on a concrete pour that nobody in the office had caught. Gerald put his fork down and stared at me for a full 10 seconds. Then he said, "Monday morning, 8 o'clock, bring your calculator." That Monday turned into every Monday. Then every day. Within a year, I was managing the estimating department, a team of 3, including a man named Walt who'd been doing takeoffs since before I was born, and who, to his enormous credit, never once resented taking direction from his boss's daughter-in-law. Within 2 years, I was reviewing every bid that left the building. I restructured the entire takeoff process, replaced the paper-based system with a digital estimating platform, renegotiated 3 supplier contracts that were bleeding the company dry, one of which was a lumber agreement that had been auto-renewing at inflated rates for 6 years because nobody had bothered to read the renewal clause, and personally caught a framing subcontractor who'd been double-billing labor hours for 6 months. The overbilling totaled $67,000. Gerald called him into the office. He set the level on the stack of falsified invoices. He said the words, "Not level, not right, not mine." The sub was gone by lunch. Jolene never noticed any of this. Or if she noticed, she didn't care. What she cared about was the family name on the door, and her title on the business card. And she cared about making sure everyone knew that I was not a Helder by blood, that I was an outsider who had married in, that I was, in her words, basically the office help. The first time she said it, I was standing in the lobby with a client, a developer named Phil Taggart, who was about to sign a $1.9 million contract for a mixed-use project on the east side. Phil had asked me a question about the curtain wall specification. I was mid-sentence, walking him through the cost comparison between 2 glazing systems, when Jolene came through the front door. She was wearing sunglasses indoors. She extended her hand and said, "Phil, so glad to finally meet you. I see you've met Renee. She's basically our office help. Let me walk you through the scope." She took his elbow and steered him down the hallway before I could finish my sentence. I stood there holding a red folder with every calculation that made that bid possible. Phil signed the contract the next day. Jolene sent a company-wide email congratulating herself on landing the Taggart project. She didn't mention my name. Gerald saw the email. He forwarded it to me with one line, "I know who landed it. So do you." That evening, he called me at home. His voice was quiet, the way it got when he was being careful with his words. "Renee," he said, "I want you to know something. I see what she does. I've seen it for a long time, and I want you to know I'm going to make sure it doesn't matter." I didn't fully understand what he meant. Not then. But I thanked him, and I went back to work the next morning at 6:15. Same as always. If you've ever had someone take credit for your work while calling you the help to your face, you know the feeling. It's not anger. Not exactly. It's something colder than anger. It's watching someone build their entire reputation on a foundation they didn't pour, using materials they can't identify, in a building they've never inspected, and knowing, in your bones, that one day the inspector is going to show up. Hit subscribe, because what Gerald did next changed everything. 3 years before Gerald died, he called me into his office on a Thursday afternoon. It was October. The light was coming through the blinds in stripes across his desk. The torpedo level was sitting on top of a manila envelope. He slid the envelope across to me and told me to read it. Inside was a stock transfer agreement. Gerald Helder, as sole shareholder of Helder Construction Group, was transferring 51% of all issued shares to Renee Castillo Helder. Not to David, not to Jolene, to me. I looked up at him. My hands were shaking. "Gerald, I can't accept." He held up one finger. "Just one. You can. And you will. Because you're the only one who shows up. He said it the way he said everything that mattered. Simply. Like it was a measurement that didn't require debate. He told me he'd had the documents prepared by an outside attorney, a man named Curtis Page, who had no prior relationship with the company and no connection to Jolene. The transfer was structured as a gift of closely held stock, with an independent valuation already completed by a certified business appraiser. The company was valued at $4.2 million. My 51% was worth $2.14 million on paper. Gerald retained 49%, which would pass to David and Jolene equally through his estate upon his death. He made me sign it that day. I asked him if I could take it home, think about it, talk to David. He shook his head. This isn't a conversation, he said. It's a decision. And I made it 2 years ago. I've just been watching to make sure I was right. He paused. I was right. Witnessed by Curtis Page and a paralegal named Monica Reeves. Notarized by a woman named Linda Estrada who drove in from Mesa specifically for this purpose. A woman who had notarized Gerald's documents for 15 years, and who later told Curtis that she had never seen Gerald more certain of anything. Gerald also wrote a notarized letter of intent, a separate document, handwritten on yellow legal paper in his careful block printing, explaining the reasoning behind the transfer. I've never shared the full contents of that letter publicly, but one line stays with me. I've carried it in my chest for 3 years like a cornerstone carries the weight of a building. It said, "A company is a structure, and structures stand on whoever does the work, not whoever hangs the sign." Gerald told me to put everything, the stock certificates, the board resolution authorizing the transfer, the letter of intent, the independent valuation report, and copies of all notarized signatures, in a safe deposit box at a bank that wasn't the company's bank. He told me not to tell David until the time was right. And he told me not to tell Jolene at all. She'll find out, he said, but she'll find out when it matters, not before. I walked out of his office that afternoon carrying a manila envelope and a torpedo level. He'd set it on top of the documents before handing them to me. "Take this too," he said. "You'll know when to use it." I didn't tell David. Not because Gerald ordered me not to. Gerald never ordered anyone to do anything. He simply explained what was correct and trusted you to recognize it. But because David would have told Jolene within a week, and Jolene would have turned Gerald's last years into a courtroom. I kept the envelope sealed in the safe deposit box. I kept the level in my desk drawer at home, and I kept showing up to work every single morning at 6:15, same as Gerald. Same as always. Gerald died 2 years ago, on a Tuesday in March. Pancreatic cancer. He was 71. The diagnosis came 8 months before the end, and he spent those 8 months exactly the way he'd spent every other month of his adult life. At the office by 6:15, reviewing estimates, walking job sites when his body allowed it, and reminding anyone who needed reminding that the level doesn't lie. On his last full day at the office, a Friday, 11 days before the end, he called me in and asked me to close the door. He didn't talk about the stock transfer. He didn't talk about the company. He talked about his wife, Eleanor, who had died in 2009, and how she used to leave his lunch on the counter, in a brown bag, with his name on it every morning. Then he said, "You're like her, Renee. Not because you make lunches, because you show up without being asked." Then he picked up a set of plans from his desk and went back to work like the conversation hadn't happened. That was Gerald. He said what needed saying, and then he moved on. He never once mentioned the stock transfer during his illness. He didn't need to. It was filed. It was recorded. It was level. After the funeral, Jolene moved fast. Within 1 week, she was in the office rearranging Gerald's things. She took his nameplate off his door. She took the framed photo of the company's first completed project, a duplex on Cactus Road in 1988. She took his desk chair, the same leather chair he'd sat in for 20 years, and had it moved into her office. She didn't take the torpedo level. It wasn't on the desk anymore. She didn't know where it was. She didn't know what it meant. She also started making decisions. She promoted herself from VP of Business Development to President and CEO. She didn't call a board meeting. She didn't consult the corporate operating agreement. She didn't ask David. She didn't ask me. She just ordered new business cards with her new title and a headshot she'd had taken at a portrait studio, and then she started restructuring. Her version of restructuring was simple and brutal. Cut the people who made her feel small and promote the people who made her feel important. She eliminated the estimating department's independent review process, the system I'd built from scratch, and replaced it with an approval process where her college friend Tanya, who had no construction background whatsoever, would sign off on bids based on whether the client seemed worth pursuing. She started underbidding commercial projects to win volume, not understanding that volume without margin is just organized bankruptcy in slow motion. She changed the company's payment terms with suppliers from net 30 to net 60 without telling the suppliers first, which nearly cost us our relationship with 2 of our 3 biggest vendors. And through all of it, through every bad decision, every vendor relationship she damaged, every dollar she left on the table because she didn't know the difference between revenue and profit, she kept introducing me to people as the office help. There was the time she brought a potential client to the office unannounced, a restaurant developer named Martin Solis who wanted to talk about a fast casual build-out. I was in the estimating room going over material costs when Jolene walked him past the open door. Martin glanced in and asked, "Is that your estimating department?" Jolene laughed and said, "Oh, that's just Renee. She's David's wife. She keeps herself busy with spreadsheets so she's not bored at home all day." Martin looked uncomfortable. I looked at the spreadsheet in front of me, a $900,000 takeoff I'd been building for a week, and I didn't say a word. I just circled the cell I was working on and kept going. Martin's project was never awarded. I later learned he went with another contractor because, in his words, he wasn't confident in the leadership structure. I wonder why. 7 months after Gerald's death, Jolene did something I could not ignore. She walked into a pre-construction meeting with a school district, a $3.4 million project for a new gymnasium, the largest bid in the company's active pipeline, and told the district superintendent, right there in a room with 6 other people, "My father built this company from nothing, and I'm carrying on his legacy. My brother David helps with field operations, and his wife," she gestured at me without turning her head. "She was basically the nanny. We keep her busy answering phones so she doesn't get bored." The nanny. She called me the nanny. In a professional meeting. In front of a public client. During a presentation I had prepared every cost estimate, every specification review, and every line item for 3 weeks of work, 62 pages. The superintendent looked at me. I was holding the bid package. He looked at Jolene, who was smiling the way she always smiled. Bright, confident, untouchable. Then he looked back at me, and I saw the question forming behind his eyes. The question everyone in that room was thinking. Who actually runs this place? I didn't correct her. Not there. I set the bid package on the conference table, excused myself politely, and walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine off for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the dashboard. And in those 11 minutes, I made 2 decisions. First, I was done being quiet. Second, I was going to let the process do the talking, because that's what Gerald would have wanted. I drove home, opened the desk drawer, and looked at the torpedo level for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called Curtis Page. I told him it was time. He said, "I've been waiting for your call, Renee. If you've ever watched someone disrespect you in a room full of professionals and chosen not to react, not because you were weak, not because you didn't have words, but because your response required a bigger stage, you understand what I was building toward. Drop a comment and tell me if you've been there. I want to hear your story." The annual shareholders meeting for Helder Construction Group was scheduled for the 2nd Tuesday in October, 1 month away. Under the company's corporate documents, the annual meeting was the one formal proceeding per year, where ownership structure, financial disclosures, officer elections, and any changes to the board of directors had to be addressed on the record. Jolene had been treating it as a formality for years. 15 minutes of Gerald reading numbers from a printed summary, everyone nodding, motion to adjourn. She assumed this year would be the same. She assumed wrong. Curtis Page filed a formal notice with the company's registered agent that a shareholder not currently recognized in internal records would be presenting ownership documentation at the annual meeting. The notice included a request to add review of current ownership structure as a mandatory agenda item under the company's bylaws. The registered agent was required by law to include it. There was nothing optional about it. Jolene received the updated agenda by certified mail at her home address. She called David that night. "Do you know what this is about?" David said he didn't. She called the company's regular attorney, a man named Brendan Voss, and asked him to investigate. Brendan pulled the company's corporate records from the Secretary of State's office, something Jolene had apparently never done herself, and found something he was not expecting. The stock transfer agreement, properly executed and filed with the state 3 years earlier, listing Renee Castillo-Helder as the holder of 51% of all issued and outstanding shares. Brendan called Jolene. I don't know his exact words, but I know that Jolene called David 20 minutes later and screamed, actually screamed so loud that David held the phone away from his ear. "Did you know about this?" David didn't know, but David, to his credit, did not panic. He did not call a lawyer. He called me. He asked me one question. "Renee, is it true?" I said yes. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Dad always told me you were the one who kept things level." I almost cried. Almost, but not quite. Because I had a meeting to prepare for. The shareholders' meeting was held in the main conference room of Helder Construction's office. The same room where Gerald used to hold his Monday morning project reviews. The same table where I'd spread out 100 bid packages over the years. There were 11 people present. Me, David, Jolene, Brendan Voss, Curtis Page, 2 long-term employees who held minor profit-sharing interests, a CPA named Donald Wren who handled the company's annual audit, a court reporter Jolene had hired to protect the record, the company's banking representative from First Western, and Jolene's husband Craig, who sat in the back row with his arms crossed and contributed nothing to the proceedings. Jolene arrived in a new blazer. She had prepared a 12-slide presentation titled, Helder Construction, The Next Chapter, A Vision for Growth. Her photo was on the cover slide. The second slide listed her as president and CEO. There was no mention of me on any slide. There was no mention of the ownership agenda item. At 10:08 a.m., Curtis Page stood. He introduced himself as outside counsel retained by Gerald Helder prior to his death, for the specific purpose of documenting and preserving a shareholder transaction. He stated that he was present to formally introduce documentation regarding the current and legally binding ownership structure of Helder Construction Group. He opened a leather binder and distributed copies of 5 documents to every person at the table. The stock transfer agreement dated 3 years before Gerald's death, the independent business valuation, the board resolution signed by Gerald as sole director authorizing the transfer, the notarized letter of intent in Gerald's handwriting, and the Secretary of State filing confirmation showing the transfer had been recorded and was part of the public corporate record. The room went silent. Jolene picked up the stock transfer agreement. She read it. She read it again. She turned to the second page, where the signatures were. She looked at Gerald's signature, the same handwriting she'd seen her whole life. Then she looked at mine. Then she looked at me, not at Curtis, not at Brendan, at me. "This isn't real," she said. Curtis said, "It is." It was executed in full compliance with state corporate law, witnessed by 2 parties, notarized by a commissioned notary public, and filed with the Secretary of State's office. Ms. Castillo-Helder holds 51% of all issued and outstanding shares of Helder Construction Group. She is the majority shareholder. Jolene's hands were shaking. She turned to Brendan Voss. "Do something." Brendan, who had already reviewed every document independently before the meeting, said quietly, "Jolene, the transfer is valid. I confirmed it with the state myself." Jolene stood up. Her chair hit the wall behind her. Her presentation slides were still glowing on the screen, her face on the cover slide, her title underneath. "She's the office help," Jolene said. Her voice was loud now, cracking at the edges. "She answers phones. She was basically the nanny. Dad would never give her. He would never. He did." Curtis didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. He did, and he explained why. His words, in the notarized letter of intent, read as follows. Curtis put on his reading glasses and lifted the document. "Renee is the only person in this family who shows up to work every day. She is not the help. She is the structure. She is not the help. She is the structure. I didn't say anything. I sat with my hands folded in my lap. The torpedo level was on the table in front of me. I'd brought it from home and placed it there before anyone else arrived, right next to my copies of the documents. Jolene hadn't noticed it when she walked in. She was too busy setting up her projector. She noticed it now. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. "Gerald gave it to me," I said. "The same day he gave me the company." Jolene looked at David. David was leaning back in his chair with his eyes closed, nodding slowly, the way people nod when they hear something they already knew confirmed by someone they trust. He wasn't angry. He wasn't surprised anymore. He looked like a man watching a building settle onto its foundation. Jolene grabbed her presentation binder, her laptop bag, and her purse. She walked to the door without looking at anyone. She stopped with her hand on the doorframe and turned back toward me. "You planned this," she said. "No," I said. "Gerald planned this. I just kept showing up." She left. Craig followed her. The door closed behind them. The court reporter, the one Jolene herself had hired to protect her record, looked at Curtis Page and asked, "Would you like this on the official record?" Curtis said, "Every word." The room was quiet for a long time after that. Donald Wren, the CPA, broke the silence. He said, "For the record, the company's financials are in order, and the majority shareholder is present. Do we have a motion to proceed with the annual review?" David raised his hand. "So moved." I seconded. The meeting continued. After the meeting, 3 things happened. First, Brendan Voss submitted his resignation as the company's attorney, not because of any wrongdoing or ethical breach, but because he said his continued representation would create a conflict of interest. He recommended a firm in Scottsdale that specialized in closely held businesses. I thanked him for his honesty and hired them the following week. Second, I called a company-wide staff meeting, not a shareholders meeting, an all-hands. I stood in the shop bay where Gerald used to hold his Friday walkthroughs, surrounded by pickup trucks and tool bins and the smell of cut lumber, and I told everyone the truth. I told them I'd been the majority owner for 3 years and had chosen not to disclose it until now. I told them nothing was going to change about how the company operated day to day, because the way it operated was the way Gerald built it, and that was the way it was going to stay. I told them the independent review process for estimates was being reinstated effective immediately. I told them Tanya was being reassigned to a role that matched her actual qualifications. And I told them that if anyone had a question about who I was, or what my role had been at this company for the last 7 years, they were welcome to pull any bid package that had left this building during that time. My initials were on every single one. Nobody asked a question. Ramon, the field foreman who'd been with Gerald for 19 years, who'd helped pour the company's first foundation on Cactus Road, walked up to me after everyone else had gone back to work. He didn't say anything. He just handed me a hard hat, one of the old ones, faded yellow, with Gerald's handwritten job numbers still visible on the brim in black marker. He nodded once. I nodded back. That hard hat is on my desk now, next to the level. Third, David came to my house that evening. He sat at the kitchen table and said, "I owe you an apology." I told him he didn't. He said, "I do. I let her talk to you that way for years. I saw it happen. I heard it happen. And I told myself it was just Jolene being Jolene, like that made it acceptable." Dad stopped it the only way he knew how, on paper, with proper documentation, the way he did everything. But I should have stopped it out loud, with my voice, in the moment. I told him the truth, which is that David had always been kind to me, and kindness matters even when it's quiet. Especially when it's quiet. We sat at that table for a long time without speaking. The level was between us on the tablecloth. Jolene contested the stock transfer. Her attorney filed a formal challenge alleging undue influence and diminished mental capacity at the time of signing. Curtis Page responded with Gerald's complete medical records from the period of the transfer. 3 full years before his death, more than 2 years before his cancer diagnosis, showing him in excellent cognitive health with no medications affecting judgment or decision-making. He also submitted the independent valuation report, a deposition from Linda Estrada the notary, confirming that Gerald was alert, oriented, conversational, and spoke clearly and at length about his intentions for approximately 20 minutes before signing, and a written statement from Monica Reeves, the paralegal witness, corroborating the same. The judge dismissed the challenge in 7 weeks. Jolene's attorney advised her not to appeal. She didn't. Jolene now holds 24.5% of the company, her half of Gerald's remaining 49%, split equally with David under the terms of his will. She has not set foot in the office since the shareholders meeting. Her title has been formally changed from president and CEO to minority shareholder. She does not have an office. She does not have a company email address. She does not have a business card. She does not have a key. I do, and I'm there every morning at 6:15. In the 4 months since I formally assumed control, the company has recovered $190,000 in margin by repricing 3 contracts Jolene had underbid. We've restored every vendor relationship she nearly destroyed. Walt, my estimator who'd been sidelined during Jolene's restructuring, is back at his desk doing takeoffs like he never left. 2 clients who'd gone quiet during what they diplomatically called the transition period have come back with new projects. And the company's insurance carrier, who had flagged concerns about management stability, has renewed our policy at the original premium. Nobody calls me the office help anymore. Nobody calls me the nanny. Nobody introduces me with an apology or a diminishing qualifier. When the phone rings and someone asks to speak with the owner of Helder Construction, the receptionist says, "One moment, I'll transfer you to Renee." Last month, I won the school district project, the $3.4 million gymnasium. The superintendent called me directly to award the contract. He remembered the pre-construction meeting 8 months earlier. He remembered who was holding the bid package and who was holding a business card. He remembered who was called the nanny and who knew every specification by heart. When I walked him through the final estimate in person, he shook my hand and said, "I always had a feeling you were the one actually running things." I smiled and told him I wasn't running things. I was just keeping them level. I keep Gerald's torpedo level on my desk now, right where he used to keep his. Same spot, same angle, same scratched brass housing. When I set it on a stack of contracts or a bid package that doesn't feel right, I can almost hear him, his voice low, certain, unimpressed by anyone who confused volume with value. If it's not level, it's not right. And if it's not right, it's not mine. Jolene sent David a text last week. It said, "I never thought Dad would do this to me." David showed it to me. I read it twice. And what I thought, what I didn't say out loud, because I've learned that some truths don't need to be spoken to be heard, was this. Gerald didn't do anything to you, Jolene. He did something for the company. You just couldn't tell the difference because you never learned what the company actually was. It wasn't the sign. It wasn't the business cards. It wasn't the country club lunches or the blazer you bought for a meeting you thought was yours. It was the 6:15 mornings, the bid packages, the cold coffee and the late-night scope reviews. It was the work, and the work was mine. That's my story. And if you've ever been called the help by someone who couldn't survive a single day doing your job, if you've ever been the one who showed up before sunrise, stayed past dark, and never once got your name on the door while someone else took the credit and the title, I want you to sit with this. The people who do the work don't need their name on the sign. They need it on the deed. And sometimes, the quietest person in the building is the one who owns it. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Karma's Keeper. Because we believe that the truth doesn't shout, it files paperwork. This story is a work of fiction. All names, characters, businesses, and events are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental and unintentional. This content is created for entertainment purposes only, and does not constitute legal, financial, or professional advice.